The early 2000s were an interesting time for the internet. Some might call it a golden age, others not so much. However, sites like Newgrounds were thriving, and since the release of a personal favourite of mine, 28 days later, the zombie genre had started making a bit of a comeback. It didn't take long for this to catch on outside of films, especially as mentioned before, on the internet. This leads to a small franchise by the name of Dead Frontier poking its head out, the first of which was released on Newgrounds and its own website in October 2007 by Jagged Blade Software. They released a couple demos of what promised to be a large-scale MMO in the future, to show off the gameplay mechanics and a general background story for what they had in mind, being a type of top-down episodic shooters, the first two being a sort of last stand, hold out as long as you can type of game, sort of like the last Resident Evil levels, and the last being an on-the-move escape with a timer, sort of like the last Resident Evil levels. They're alright, but being old Flash games, they do break from time to time. Otherwise, a decent tech demo with a sprinkle of lore and a dose of jank. The first initial version of the full game was released on the 21st of April 2008, though still in beta. It did however have features such as characters, an XP and money system, and everything else you'd expect from a roleplay MMO. Not much footage of the game is available from around this time, though it was presumably in 2D and from the top down at this point. Over the next couple of months, the devs would add several features to the game, such as PvP, a player-run market and trading system, and the next year in 2009, missions were released that gave players a reason and reward to venture out into the game's barren wasteland. A couple months later, two more smaller spin-off games were released, named Dead Frontier Outbreak. Smaller projects on most game sites designed to promote the main Dead Frontier attraction, receiving positive acclaim, mainly being a text-based choose-your-own-adventure game. It was actually surprisingly captivating, even if it did contain some 2000s edginess and a couple of voice-acting bloopers.
Before I had a chance to warn anyone.
I could see it being a film or something of the kind, even if the lore itself is pretty typical for zombie media. A nice expansion and background for what it is, though the main selling point of the story being sort of bottlenecked into only one or two choices being correct to progress or not making a difference at all. It does give you ranks similar to the scores of previous demo games, which is a nice addition. Then, in 2010, it was announced that Dead Frontier would be getting a 3D update, which did change up the game quite a bit. Whether it was for better or worse is of course debatable, but since I don't have access to the original version, I'm not gonna argue. After this, they added several more updates, such as outposts and whatnot, until around 2016, when they slowed to work on a new project. However, the game is still up, and itself as a finished product is rather interesting. It operates on a website as inventory and camps, but with a standalone launcher for the 3D open world aspect. The website aspect has quite a few activities, with sections to store items, the aforementioned marketplace and trading system, although it is a little dead at the moment, and several other things, including places to take on quests to progress your character's skills, and of course finances. So you might as well venture out into the world, though if you do that, be prepared for a lot of walking, since the open world is actually pretty massive and includes a lot of enterable interiors and sometimes interactable props such as trash cans and of course plenty of zombies, some typical and some more unique such as dogs and flaming people. And there must have been a heck of an overweight problem in town too. Either way, this is where most of your main gameplay will take place, and it definitely has an atmosphere to it. Sort of reminds me of the early Silent Hill or Resident Evil titles, partially due to the low fidelity graphics and partially due to the zombie dogs. You encounter all sorts of other players as well. There's still quite a few active even today. It's up to you to loot, quest and do what you want out here, but I do have a couple of criticisms as well. The open world is large but feels a bit repetitive, with not much change in scenery and most streets being quite linear. There's also loading zones between them, and the inventory is on the website. It takes 5 seconds to open the menus, though the game doesn't pause, as it's multiplayer. Though these may just just be limitations of the engine. It does share a couple similarities with games such as Project Zomboid, though this is more on the grindy side. But overall, not too bad. Now you may be wondering what the other project the team went to work on was. Well, in 2019, Dead Frontier 2 was released on Steam, promising to be a proper 3D open world game. It did sound promising, and best of all, it was free! However, the first sign of trouble is entering the game you need to register for an account. Now this was in the original too, but this is a Steam release, so why not just use that? Either way, navigating past that, these menus are a little tacky, but once you get into the game you essentially get plopped into one of the main hubs for everything at the police station. The graphics are an improvement, but now have a bit of that Unity asset feel. You get a lot of quests immediately, which may be a little overwhelming, and if we just look at the movement you can see someone's been playing Resident Evil 2 Remake. Once you do leave though, the map is once again quite large. Not as large as the first game I think, but still pretty large. And this time, along with the linear city streets, you do at least get a few fields and bogs to break up the monotony, though most interiors are still very similar and a little confusing. The map is divided into sections by how skilled you are, which in theory is a good idea, though a lot of that is down to how much you grind or pay to win. Yup, this game does have microtransactions. Apparently it does have more content, such as new types of infected and such, with weekly events to keep the community alive, but to be honest I sort of got bored with it after only about half an hour or so. And remember, this is 5 years after the game's release. Now of course they may polish and add through updates, but until then, I'd say try the original first and see if you would enjoy this sort of thing. To be honest with you, I think I like the spin-offs more than the actual newest mainline entry, but of course only time will tell. So that's pretty much where the Dead Frontier franchise is at right now. I don't want to rip into Dead Frontier 2 too hard, as the developers are an indie studio on top of all these games being free. It is commendable that Creaky Corps have kept the franchise going for as long as they have, and though it may seem a bit dead at the moment, who knows what's going to happen next. Either way, this'll be me signing off.
I know you for pain, and nothing in this life will ever be the same. And Dead Frontier is no longer just a game. Fame is less important than food and water. If I die by a zombie, I'm a useless martyr. To the Dead Frontier, in the land of the living where we live just to die. Struggle every day just to try to survive. To the Dead Frontier.